Richard Voss had spent so many years being recognized that he had forgotten what equality felt like. So when red and blue lights bloomed behind his black SUV on a humid Florida evening, he didn't think he was being stopped like everyone else. He thought somebody had made a mistake. At first, he did not even pull over straight away. He looked into the rearview mirror, checked the road ahead, glanced at the glowing message still open on his phone, and let out the kind of irritated breath powerful men save for moments when life inconveniences them in public. Traffic rolled past in ribbons of white and amber. Palm trees bent slightly in the warm wind. Somewhere up ahead, neon from a petrol station smeared color across the wet surface of the road. The police lights stayed on. Richard eased the SUV onto the shoulder, one hand at the top of the wheel, jaw tight, expression already rehearsing the offense he planned to take. He checked his reflection in the mirror before the officer even reached the window. Gray at the temples, crisp white shirt, gold cufflinks, a face that had spent the last year on campaign posters, donor invitations, breakfast radio spots, and smiling outdoor banners promising strong leadership and safer streets. Then Officer Zariah Cole stepped into view. She moved with the quiet economy of someone who did not waste energy performing authority because she already carried it. Dark uniform, neat and exact. Hair secured cleanly beneath her cap, torch clipped, radio live, body cam fixed square to her chest, the tiny red light on and steady. Her face was composed. Her voice, when it came, was level enough to make his irritation look childish before he had even spoken. "Good evening, sir. Sarasota County Police. You're being recorded on audio and video. The reason for the stop is that you were traveling 57 in a 40 and you were using your phone while driving." Richard turned his head slowly, looked her over once, and smiled. It was not a warm smile. It was the smile of a man reaching for the lever that had always worked. "Do you know who I am?" She did not smile back. "May I see your license, registration, and proof of insurance, please?" That was the first crack. Tiny, almost invisible, but real. Most people changed when they recognized him. Even if they disliked him, they adjusted. Tone softened, posture shifted, they became careful. Some wanted something, some feared something. Some simply understood that life moved more smoothly when men like Richard Voss felt acknowledged. But this officer did not change shape at all. He let the silence sit, expecting his name to fill it. When it did not, his voice tightened just slightly. "I asked if you know who I am. And I asked for your license, registration, and insurance." The smile slipped. Cars passed close enough to make the SUV tremble. Zariah stood still in the roadside glow as though none of it disturbed her. Not the speed of traffic, not the expensive vehicle, not the man inside it, not even the old familiar tension that comes when someone decides the law is a personal insult. Richard reached into his jacket pocket, pulled out his license, and handed it over with a deliberate flick of his fingers. "You people really don't know how to approach residents in this city." Zariah glanced down at the card. Richard Voss. She had known before seeing it. County commissioner candidate, money, signs everywhere. One of those men whose face had become so common in the city that even people who did not follow politics had absorbed him through repetition alone. She also remembered what Lieutenant Price had said at roll call 2 mornings earlier. Election season makes some people reckless. Document everything. Let the footage do the arguing. Zariah handed the license back. "Registration and insurance, please." Richard held her gaze, trying to force a reaction, trying to make her realize the scene she was in and the mistake she was making by not bending. When that failed, he gave a short laugh and leaned back in his seat. "I know the chief. I know the mayor. I have represented people in this department during negotiations. I've raised money for community projects half this city takes credit for, so before you decide to turn this into theater, think carefully." He said it softly, almost kindly, as though he was warning her for her own benefit. Zariah's expression did not shift. "Registration and insurance, sir." Now he let his annoyance show. He opened the center console and began rifling through it, with the irritated force of a man who wants the search itself to count as humiliation. Sunglasses case, toll receipts, business cards, hand sanitizer, a folded campaign leaflet with his own face on the front. He muttered just loudly enough for her to hear. "This is unbelievable. In my own county. Over nothing." Zoraya waited. He stopped searching and looked up sharply. "Or maybe that's it. Maybe this is not over nothing. Maybe you saw the name and thought tonight was your lucky night." Zoraya said, "Do you have the registration?" He laughed again, but this time there was no performance in it, only irritation. "You are making a career-ending mistake." The words landed heavy between them. It was one thing to complain, one thing to posture, but a threat like that, plain and unwrapped, always changed the chemistry of a stop. Zoraya gave him one more chance. "Sir, do you have the registration?" He stared at her for a beat longer, trying one last time to locate fear. When he found none, he reached for his phone. That was when the night truly began. He unlocked it, tapped a number from memory, and raised the device so she could see it. "I'll save us both some time." "Sir," Zoraya said, "do not use your phone during this stop except as instructed." But he had already hit call. The line rang twice. "Bobby," Richard said the moment it connected. "Yeah, I've been stopped by one of yours. No, not a problem yet. She's out here trying to be a hero, speeding, texting, all the usual nonsense. She either doesn't know who she's talking to or she thinks this is how she gets promoted." Every word was going into the body cam. Zoraya took one measured step back. Her tone remained controlled. "Sir, I'm conducting a lawful stop. Please provide your registration and insurance." Richard kept talking into the phone. No, she's being difficult on purpose. I'm telling you, this is one of those career decisions people regret in the morning." Something crackled back through the speaker. Richard smirked. "Exactly. Call whoever you need to call. Call the chief. Call the sergeant. Tell them Richard Voss is on the side of Fruitville Road being treated like a criminal." He ended the call and looked up at Zoraya as though he had just moved a winning piece on a board only he understood. "You still want the paperwork?" "Yes." His mouth hardened. He yanked open the glove compartment, shoved aside a thick stack of folded documents and manuals, and pulled out 2 papers. He held them up without properly looking at them. "There. Happy?" Zoraya took them, checked them, and immediately saw the issue. Valid insurance, expired registration. Richard saw her eyes move across the page and tried to overrun the facts with noise. "Oh, come on. Don't start stacking things because your ego got bruised. There's a valid one in there somewhere. You know the vehicle's registered. This is ridiculous." Zoraya handed the papers back. "You were speeding, you were using your phone while driving, and you did not provide valid registration when requested. I'm returning to my vehicle." "You're writing me tickets?" "Yes, sir." "For me?" "Yes, sir." He looked as though she had just insulted his bloodline. "Are you insane?" But Zoraya had already turned, already walking back to her cruiser with the same calm pace she had approached with. No rush, no argument, no visible emotion. Her radio clicked at her shoulder as she requested a supervisor in a second unit, politically connected driver, uncooperative, threats made on scene, requesting routine support. Inside the SUV, Richard gripped the steering wheel so hard his knuckles whitened. This was not how these things went. Usually there was a moment, a little pivot in the atmosphere, a sudden return to practicality. Somebody would realize there was more to lose by being rigid than by being flexible. That was how his life had worked for years. Through charm, when charm was enough, and through pressure, when charm was not. But the black woman on the roadside had not blinked once, and something about that made him feel not just angry, but exposed. He stepped out of the vehicle before she had even finished typing. "Sir," Zoraya said immediately, "return to your car or stand on the pavement. Don't tell me where to stand." "It is for your safety and mine. Stand on the pavement." His voice rose. "You do not get to speak to me like that." The second unit arrived behind the cruiser, washing the shoulder in fresh red and blue. Officer Mateo Ramirez stepped out, took one glance at Richard, one at Zoraya, and read the shape of the whole encounter instantly. Richard pointed at Zoraya as if presenting evidence. "This one has lost her mind, absolutely drunk on authority." Ramirez said nothing. That silence irritated Richard almost as much as Zariah's composure. He wanted visible discomfort. He wanted that little shift officers sometimes made when they realized a complaint might cost them something. Instead, Ramirez remained watchful and still. Zariah returned to her paperwork. Richard followed her with his voice. "Do you know how many people I know in this department? Do you have any idea? Or do you think this uniform makes you untouchable?" Still nothing. "Look at me when I'm speaking to you." That, more than anything, told Ramirez what kind of man he was dealing with. Not a man angry about a ticket. A man furious that authority had arrived in a form he had not chosen. A black and white cruiser pulled up beside the second unit. Sergeant Daniel Mercer stepped out, closed his door, and took in the scene the way experienced supervisors do, not by starting with the loudest voice, but by finding the steadiest one. He listened to Zariah first. That alone offended Richard. "She's lying," Richard cut in before Mercer could finish hearing her out. "She lied about the phone, she lied about the paperwork, and she wrote citations before I had a chance to explain anything. This is targeted. She saw my name and went hunting." Mercer did not answer him immediately. He asked Zariah, "Bodycam on from initial contact?" "Yes, Sergeant." "Radio traffic recorded?" "Yes, Sergeant." Richard stepped closer. "Good. Then you'll hear how disrespectful she's been from the first second." Mercer finally looked at him fully. "Mr. Voss, step back onto the pavement." The use of his surname, flat and unadorned, hit him like a slap. "You know who I am?" "Yes." "And you're still speaking to me like I'm some teenager by the curb?" Mercer's face barely moved. "You have been issued 3 citations. If you wish to contest them, you can do that through the court. If you wish to make a complaint, I'll document it." Richard gave a humorless laugh. "Document it? No, Sergeant. You'll do something about it." Mercer's eyes flicked briefly to Zariah's body cam and back. "I'll review the footage." That was not enough. Richard could feel control slipping, and he hated the sensation. This officer has no respect, no judgment, and no idea how to speak to people who built this city. Zariah remained silent. The line echoed on the roadside and drew a few more eyes. A cyclist had slowed on the far side of the junction. 2 motorists at a petrol station were lingering with their doors open. A rideshare passenger across the road had his phone lifted chest high, probably recording. Mercer said, "Mr. Voss, I'm not going to debate the stop with you on the roadside." Richard threw up his hands. "Of course not, because you know exactly what this is. She wanted to embarrass me. She wanted to show how brave she was. That's what this is, ambition." For the first time since the stop began, Zariah spoke directly into the silence. "With respect, sir, the issue is not that I know who you are." The road seemed to hold its breath. Richard turned slowly. "What did you say?" Zariah looked at him with the same calm face she had worn since the first moment. "The issue is that you expected me to treat you like the law did not apply." No shout, no flourish, just truth. And because it was true, it hit harder than any insult could have. Mercer stepped in at once. "That's enough. Mr. Voss, you can either wait for the rest of the supervisory review or you can leave once I finish speaking with you." Richard's face flushed dark red. He was no longer simply angry. He was humiliated. And humiliation makes entitled men reckless. He pointed at Zariah again, this time with a trembling hand. "You are done. You hear me? Done. 7 years on the force, you won't make 8. Nobody answered. That silence was devastating, because silence told every witness exactly what was happening. His threat had not landed. The officers were not scrambling. No one was hurrying to rescue him from consequence. The room, such as it was, had stopped revolving around his sense of importance. He got back into his SUV and slammed the door hard enough to shake the frame. Inside, he immediately rang Troy Bennett, his campaign manager. Troy answered on the first ring. "Tell me you are not calling from trouble." Richard's voice came out low and furious. "I've got some officer out here acting like she's running a military checkpoint, speeding, Texting, registration, whole circus. She recognized me and decided tonight was her chance to make a name. Troy was quiet for a second too long. Is this being recorded? It's a traffic stop. Of course it's recorded. Another silence. Then Troy said, "Richard, stop talking." Richard stared through the windscreen at Zariah's silhouette near the cruiser. "I'm not going to stop talking when some jumped-up traffic officer is trying to humiliate me. Then stop saying things that sound like threats." Richard scoffed. "Consequences are not threats. On camera they are." That line irritated him enough to end the call. Outside, Mercer took the complaint and clipped notes. Zariah gave her statement. Ramirez watched traffic and occasionally glanced towards the growing little knot of bystanders on the far side of the road. The whole scene had become procedural, boring, controlled, exactly the kind of machinery men like Richard hated most because it could not be charmed once it started moving. 20 minutes later, he was allowed to leave. He drove home in a state of disbelief, so complete it was almost childish. His entire worldview had been offended. He kept replaying the stop in his head, but even in his own mind he could not make Zariah look afraid. That was what unsettled him. Not the citations, not the bystanders, not even the threat of a complaint. It was her stillness. Her refusal to acknowledge the hierarchy he assumed governed every room he walked into. At home, he paced the kitchen while the ice in his whiskey melted untouched. He called Bobby. He called a donor. He called a local radio host he sometimes fed outrage to when outrage was useful. He kept telling the story the same way. Disrespect, power trip, ambush, young officer chasing headlines. He never once said the words Bodycam. At the station, Lieutenant Alana Price sat in a small office with the blinds half drawn and the Bodycam footage open on a wide monitor. She was a woman whose stillness made liars nervous. She watched the stop once through without pausing, then again with a legal pad. Then she pulled the radio logs, then dispatched timestamps, then the traffic camera footage from the junction, then the metadata confirming when the recording started and synced. Every source told the same story. Speed confirmed, phone in hand before the stop, repeated refusals, escalating threats, multiple attempts to leverage political relationships, no procedural violation from Officer Cole, no aggression, no disrespect that could survive contact with footage. Price leaned back and looked at the complaint summary. Richard Voss. Then she did something that would later matter far more than anyone on the roadside realized. She searched internal notes, old supervisor reports, off-book mentions, complaint fragments, anything informal where his name had surfaced before. 3 small references appeared. A fundraising event parking dispute, a call made after midnight when a friend had been refused access somewhere, a note from a desk sergeant months earlier about a known local figure who had tried to intimidate an officer over a tow. Nothing major on its own, everything familiar together. A pattern without enough daylight on it. Until now. The next morning the station was already moving differently. Not gossip, not exactly. More the cautious atmosphere that arrives when everyone understands a politically sensitive problem is climbing the chain of command. Some officers had seen a summary. A few had heard snippets of the roadside radio, others had only heard the name, but everybody knew enough to keep their voices low. Zariah reported for duty on schedule, as though nothing in the world had changed. She parked, signed out her vehicle, checked her gear, and began her shift briefing with the same clean focus she brought to every day. A younger officer lingered beside her locker, looking as though he wanted to say something. She saved him the effort. "You all right?" she asked. He blinked. "Yes, ma'am." "Good. Then work." That was Zariah's way. No performance, no fishing for sympathy, no turning herself into the center of a public morality tale. She understood something many people did not. If you have handled yourself properly, you do not need to announce it. Time does that for you. By midday, Troy Bennett had seen an internal summary through a political back channel, not the footage itself, just the summary. That was enough to make his stomach drop. Campaigns can survive awkward remarks. They can survive old photos, contradictory positions, even a messy personal life if the polling holds. What they do not survive, not when running on law and order slogans, is clear footage of a wealthy white candidate threatening a calm black female officer during a routine traffic stop while sounding like he believes the badge belongs beneath him. Troy called Richard 3 times before he picked up. "What?" "Do not post anything," Troy said. "Do not release a statement. Do not call the chief again. Do not speak to radio. Do not speak to donors. Do not speak to anybody." Richard was pacing again. "Oh, now you're worried." "I'm worried because the footage is bad." "Bad how?" Troy exhaled slowly. "Bad as in complete. Bad as in calm officer, angry candidate. Bad as in your threats are audible. Bad as in every second makes you look more entitled than the second before it." Richard stopped moving. "She provoked me. The footage does not support that. She was disrespectful. The footage does not support that either. She knew who I was." Troy shut his eyes for a moment. "Richard, that is exactly the problem." That sentence sat between them like a verdict. For the first time since the stop, something colder than anger entered Richard's chest. Fear. Not fear of the law. Men like him rarely fear the law in a direct way. Fear of exposure. By early evening, a local journalist had got hold of transcript excerpts. Not the whole body cam, just lines. Enough lines. "Do you know who I am? You're making a career-ending mistake. 7 years might not turn into 8. 3 lines, 3 bullets, 3 perfect fragments for a public already tired of watching powerful people talk like consequence was for other families." The journalist posted a brief piece online. Then a bigger outlet picked it up. Then another. By nightfall, producers were calling campaign staff. Richard's donors were texting. His wife had stopped replying altogether. He finally did what frightened men always do when they can no longer control the facts. He tried to control the story. He recorded a short video statement from his study with books blurred behind him and a carefully chosen lamp warming one side of his face. He spoke about a regrettable roadside misunderstanding and heightened emotions after a long campaign week. He said he had the deepest respect for law enforcement. He said he had felt unexpectedly and unusually confronted. He apologized for his tone without apologizing for his conduct. It might have worked 10 years earlier. It died the moment the full body cam footage came out, because the camera loved Zariah, not in a glamorous way, in a moral way. She looked calm while he got smaller and uglier with every minute. He became the architect of his own collapse. Every threat he made only exposed how weak he felt when ordinary rules were applied to him. Every time he said "people like me" without saying the exact words, the audience heard the exact meaning. Cable commentators tore into it. Local radio chewed it apart. Online, the video traveled far beyond Florida because the story was instantly legible in every city in America. Wealthy man, black woman in authority, routine accountability treated as a personal betrayal. It was old, familiar, ugly, and the footage was so clean it left nowhere to hide. Comment sections filled with people who did not even care about the election, but cared very much about the sight of arrogance finally running into a wall it could not bully. Donors started stepping back. One said the campaign had become a distraction. Another postponed an event indefinitely. A local business owner who had publicly backed Richard released a statement saying, "Respect for public servants is non-negotiable." That one stung. But what cut deepest was not the criticism from enemies. It was the silence from friends. Men who had slapped his back for years suddenly took too long to return calls. One texted, "Need to let this cool." Another said, "Can't help till I see the full facts," as though the full facts were not already everywhere. Troy came to the house the following morning. Richard met him in the kitchen in yesterday's trousers and a clean shirt that did not hide how badly he had slept. "How bad?" Troy dropped a folder onto the counter. Inside were printouts, headlines, polling snapshots, screenshots of comments, donor messages, press inquiries. One of the pages was a still from the body cam, Zariah on one side of the frame, calm and straight-backed, Richard on the other, finger pointed, mouth open mid-threat. It looked worse frozen, more desperate, more revealing. Troy said, "You are done unless something changes." Richard sank into a chair. "Over a traffic stop?" "No," Troy said. "Over who people saw during one." That was the truth of it. Scandal had not created a monster, it had simply turned the lights on. Richard looked at the still image again and felt an emotion he almost never felt. Shame. Not the useful kind politicians fake, the private kind that arrives when you see yourself from outside and realize the version of you that exists in your own mind is not the version everyone else just watched in high definition. But shame in men like Richard rarely stays soft for long. It hardens. Within hours, he was blaming Troy for not containing the fallout, blaming the department for politically timed release, blaming the media for bias, blaming Zariah for baiting him with unnatural coldness, which was the sort of phrase only a deeply entitled man would think sounded intelligent. Troy listened for a while, then cut him off. "You still do not understand." Richard looked up. "This is not about the ticket. It is not about policy. It is not even about race in the way you are telling yourself. It is about the fact that millions of people just watched a man who believes he deserves softer rules the moment he is inconvenienced." Richard's jaw tightened. Troy went on. "You were fine when you thought you were speaking down. The second she held the line, you turned ugly. Everybody saw it." For a moment, the room was silent, except for the low hum of the fridge. Then Richard said, very quietly, "She wanted to humiliate me." Troy shook his head. "No, she just did her job in front of a camera. That was worse." Because if Troy was right, then the entire collapse belonged to Richard alone. No conspiracy, no setup, no misunderstanding, just revelation. Across town, Zariah finished another shift, filed routine paperwork, and left through the side entrance into warm evening air. A small group of journalists had been outside earlier in the day, hoping for a statement. The department had given them nothing. Zariah had given them less. She drove home in silence. At a red light, she caught her reflection in the rearview mirror and thought briefly of her mother, who had once told her that some people become dangerous the moment they can no longer place you beneath them. Not because you have harmed them, because you have confused them. And confused people with power often reach for cruelty before clarity. That had been the whole stop, really. A man confused that the script had changed. At home, her phone was full of unread messages, some from fellow officers, some from cousins, some from strangers who had found her through the internet's usual ugly efficiency. She ignored most of them. One message she did read came from Lieutenant Price. Simple, dry, typical. "You handled yourself properly. Get some rest." Zariah smiled once and put the phone face down. By the end of the week, Richard's campaign was effectively dead. He had not formally withdrawn yet, but the shape of the ending was obvious. Volunteers stopped showing up. Donors went quiet. Opponents began speaking about public trust with the solemn delight of people who smell blood. The apology cycle only made things worse. Every new statement sounded more managed than the last, and management is death when the original footage feels brutally honest. Then, one more problem emerged. Lieutenant Price's internal review flagged the older notes linked to Richard's name. They were not enough for formal action on their own, but once the Bodycam became public, they changed how the department interpreted the present. This was not a one-off roadside outburst. It looked increasingly like a man long accustomed to leaning on institutions whenever they touched him. A reporter got wind of that as well, not the specific incidents, just the idea of a pattern. The headline wrote itself. How many times had he done this when no camera was there? That question was poison. Not because it proved anything new, but because it invited the public to imagine the unseen. And once people start imagining the unseen, the visible footage becomes only the tip of something darker. 3 days later, Richard stood behind a podium in a small rented room with a campaign banner drooping behind him. He looked diminished. The old smile had gone brittle. He announced he was suspending campaign operations to focus on family and reflection. Even then, he could not fully surrender the pose. He spoke about service, about hard lessons, about public life being unforgiving. He did not once mention Officer Zariah Cole by name, but everybody knew who had really closed the room around him, not because she attacked him, because she never gave him anything to attack back. That was the genius of competence under pressure. It turns a bully's volume into self-destruction. If you're still watching, tell me where you're watching from and tell me this. What should happen when powerful people think ordinary accountability is beneath them? Because that is the real nerve of this story. Not speeding, not texting, not even the citations. The real story is what happened when a man used to moving through the world like a private exception suddenly met a system, and a woman inside it who refused to bend. 2 weeks after the campaign collapsed, Lieutenant Price found an envelope on her desk with no return address. Inside were photocopies of 3 old incident numbers, a fundraiser guest list, and one handwritten line in black ink. He has done this before. She was not the first. Price read the sentence twice, then looked through the narrow glass panel in her office door at officers moving through the corridor. The public story was already complete, satisfying even, but some stories leave a residue, a sense that what came into view was only the piece that happened to be filmed. She put the paper back into the envelope and locked it in her drawer. Across the city, Zariah was already back on the road. Another humid evening, another line of headlights sliding across black tarmac, another stream of people convinced their destination mattered more than the rules guiding everyone else there. A silver sedan flew through a yellow light and accelerated. Zariah flicked on her lights and pulled out after it, calm, steady, unimpressed. Because the thing men like Richard Voss never understand until it is too late is this. Power is not always the loudest voice in the scene. Sometimes power is the person who does not need to raise theirs. Sometimes power is a woman who knows the law, knows herself, and knows that cameras are merciless when arrogance finally meets evidence. And sometimes justice does not arrive shouting. Sometimes it walks up to your car, asks for your registration, gives you every opportunity to choose dignity, and then stands still while you explain to the whole world exactly who you are. That night, Richard Voss thought he was teaching Officer Zariah Cole a lesson about status. Instead, she taught the country a lesson about character. And the difference between those two things ended his campaign. Some people do not fear wrongdoing. They fear ordinary treatment. Richard could have taken the ticket, paid the fine, and gone home irritated. That would have been forgettable. A private annoyance, a minor bruise to a man already swollen with self-importance. But he did not simply resent the stop. He resented the equality in it. He resented being addressed in the same measured tone any other driver would have heard. He resented being asked for paperwork like any other man. He resented being told where to stand for safety, because in his mind, safety instructions were for people managed by systems, not for people like him who believed they were close enough to power to become part of the system itself. And when he realized a black woman in uniform was not going to make herself smaller around his name, he reached for the only tools that had probably saved him before. Threat, status, pressure, personal insult, institutional fear. But there is a problem with using those tools in front of a clean camera and a calm witness. They stop looking like strength. They start looking like confession. That is why this story traveled. Not because people enjoy a public collapse, though many do. It traveled because everyone recognized the type. The man who calls arrogance confidence when it is aimed downward. The man who says respect when he means obedience. The man who says misunderstanding when he means exposure. The man who only remembers the law exists once it applies to him. And it traveled because Officer Zariah Cole represented something millions of people ache to see more often in the world. Not revenge, not spectacle, not a dramatic speech designed for virality, just competence, self-possession, discipline. A person under pressure refusing to become smaller, louder, or uglier simply because someone else could not control themselves. That kind of dignity does not always trend. But when it does, it hits with unusual force because people can feel how rare it is. So the lesson is simple. Status can buy silence. Money can buy access. Connections can buy delay. But once truth is clean, once evidence is complete, once a person of character holds their ground long enough for arrogance to expose itself, all those expensive advantages start to look very cheap. And that is why Richard Voss lost far more than a traffic stop. He lost the gap between who he thought he was and what the camera proved. If this story stayed with you, drop your biggest lesson in the comments. And remember this: the most dangerous moment for a bully is not when somebody fights back. It is when somebody stays calm enough to let the whole world see them clearly.